After the better part of 3 years as the Doctor, Patrick Troughton decided to leave the show, having become exhausted by the show's near-constant schedule. His 3 seasons featured between 40 and 44 episodes, and these episodes aired in some cases less than a few weeks after filming. The filming setup was almost akin to making a theatre production. The episodes have a live quality to them. Many mistakes are left in there as there just wasn't enough time to reshoot the scene. This is especially true during the first Doctor era, which also included around 40 episodes per season. As a result of this, the BBC heavily altered the show's format for the next season. For the 7th season, there were 25 episodes across 4 serials. For comparison's sake, Troughton's 3rd and final season, Season 6, featured 44 episodes told across 7 serials. The change in the number of episodes stayed until 1985. Before then, seasons ranged between 20 and 28 episodes long. The ratings for Season 6 also weren't what you could call favourable. Only 6 million or so people tuned into the opener, The Dominators. The final part of The War Games, Troughton's final story, was watched by little over 5 million viewers. Nowadays, such a figure may not be so bad, given the introduction of Netflix and iPlayer. Season 6 ended by averaging 6.38 million viewers, which across a 44-week period in a pre-catch-up world is inexcusable. The ratings were around a 1 million drop from Season 5. In short, Doctor Who had a problem. A lot of people talk about the hiatus of 1985 or the cancellation of 1989, but actually, Doctor Who came very close to getting cancelled some 20 years before it actually did. So, going into Season 7, there was a lot of change needed, and a lot of change was exactly what the show got. Once it became clear that Troughton would not be in a 4th season, the search was underway for a new Doctor. Possibly the most famous actor considered was Ron Moody, who appeared in the 1968 musical film Oliver. Having seen Moody perform in Oliver, the producers were keen to cast him. However, Ron Moody declined the offer, a decision he would go on to regret in later years. Jon Pertwee had starred in the radio sitcom The Navy Lark, and had a reputation for his comedic performances, in particular his voices. Pertwee asked his agent to apply for the Doctor Who role, only to find that he was already on the shortlist. Pertwee, while only being less than a year older than Troughton, was a very different actor. Pertwee had a background in a lot of comedic or sitcom work, and wanted to approach the Doctor with more seriousness and straightness than previous roles. Over the past 6 seasons, Doctor Who had accumulated a budgetary problem. Each new story required new sets, new costumes, new props, and new actors. All of this built up so that by the time Doctor Who was preparing for its 7th season, drastic change was needed. In order to save on the budget, Doctor Who radically changed its format, and the Doctor was exiled to Earth at the end of Season 6. But besides the new Doctor and format, there were still more changes afoot for the 7th season. Back in Season 5, Colonel Lethbridge Stewart was introduced as a key ally of the Doctor's on Earth in the story The Web of Fear. Lethbridge Stewart was part of UNIT, which wasn't fully introduced until the next season in The Invasion. UNIT, otherwise known as the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, at this point recurred in the show whenever the Doctor faced an alien threat on modern-day Earth. UNIT and Lethbridge Stewart, who is now a brigadier, were reintroduced in Season 7 to act as the Doctor's allies while he was exiled on Earth. The Brigadier, as played by Nicholas Courtney, was seen as a very different character to the Doctor, and the two characters regularly clashed on screen. The status of the Brigadier is debated as to whether or not he was a companion. There was, however, a new companion as well, one that people are in total agreement is actually a companion. Liz Shaw was written to be an intellectual equal to the Doctor. In many ways, Liz Shaw represents what the companion role would evolve into decades later. She's resourceful, independent, and clever. Later companions in Classic Who, such as Sarah Jane Smith, would also be written in similar ways. But for the time, Liz Shaw was the first companion who had an air of being a 3-dimensional character, rather than just a screaming cardboard cutout. Season 7 also aired at a different time of year to previous seasons. Partially because of the reduction in number of episodes, Season 7 began airing in January 1970. Previous seasons typically began airing in the autumn. The opening episode of Season 7, Spearhead from Space Episode 1, aired on January 3rd, 1970. The episode, and indeed the overall story, features the newly regenerated Third Doctor on Earth, battling the new menace of the Autons and the nesting consciousness. It was written by longtime Doctor Who writer Robert Holmes, who would go on to write more memorable classics for the show. Derek Sherman, who produced the War Games and also produced this story, has been recognised for ensuring a good transition from one production team to another. Spearhead from Space is the first post-regeneration story where the Doctor is unconscious or incapacitated for a period of time. This is something the show will continue to do in many, but not all, post-regeneration stories. Spearhead from Space is generally thought of as one of the best Pertwee era episodes and also one of the best post-regeneration episodes. The story is expertly paced and has a layered and interesting plot. The general public, as discussed earlier, had been losing interest in the show, but the ratings for Spearhead from Space were fantastic, averaging around 8 million viewers. The show was back on the map, and in a big way. The next story, Doctor Who and the Silurians, featured two key milestones. The first, and rather obvious one, is that the story featured the first appearance of the Silurians on television. The Silurians have gone on to become one of the most recognisable and popular species in Who. Given their complex nature, I can't really call them monsters or enemies. And that's the thing, the Silurians are presented in many ways as rather sympathetic beings, which at this point was rather unusual for the show. Most monsters that appeared are antagonistic, or aliens. The Silurians were neither monsters, at least in the traditional sense, or aliens as they were from Earth. The second milestone was much more to do with the behind-the-scenes aspect of the show than the first milestone. As discussed, Derek Sherman produced Spearhead from Space, but did not produce any more of the Third Doctor's era. The producing role went to Barry Letts, who had directed many previous Doctor Who stories and would go on to direct Pertwee's final story, Planet of the Spiders. Spearhead from Space worked very effectively as an introduction to the new era of Doctor Who, with the Doctor being exiled on Earth and working with UNIT and everything. Tonally, however, it doesn't tell us a lot about the era that's to come. Sure, the story isn't totally different from the rest of the Pertwee era, but when Barry Letts became producer, he began introducing new themes and ideas, and the Pertwee era really expanded from this point. The Ambassadors of Death is one of the more underrated stories from Season 7. It was written by 4 people, all of whom contributed varying amounts to the script. Generally, when a story, least of all a television episode, is written by more than 2 people, it falls apart and is usually a messy, incoherent plot. However, The Ambassadors of Death is very easy to follow considering this. The Ambassador of Death in many ways represents this stage of the Pertwee era perfectly. There are investigative or conspiratorial elements in the story. The story centres around the disappearance of astronauts, which coincides with the arrival of mysterious alien ambassadors. The story is a 7-parter and is a brilliant example of how longer Doctor Who stories are able to build up the plot elements gradually, but in an interesting and gripping way. Classic Who gets a lot of stick for being boring, and while some stories may fall into the boring camp, this story most certainly does not, and in this respect, feels a bit like a feature-length movie. The final story, Inferno, is regarded as one of the best Doctor Who stories, not just in this Pertwee era, or indeed Classic Who, but all of Doctor Who in any medium. Inferno is unlike any Doctor Who story in many respects. It feels totally different in terms of the style in which it was written. Inferno centres around a drilling operation going towards the Earth's crust. The Doctor is insistent that the operation must be cancelled as he believes it is fundamentally dangerous and risks the safety of the planet. The Doctor soon finds himself transported to a parallel universe where the operation is slightly ahead of the one in his universe and Britain is now a totalitarian fascist state. Inferno is gripping television and brilliantly written. As the first Doctor Who story to have a number of its scenes set inside a parallel universe, Inferno sets up the idea nicely. Jon Pertwee was fantastic throughout his debut season, but is of particular brilliance in this story. Season 7 marked a huge change in Doctor Who, the biggest amount of changes since Doctor Who began airing. The season had no scene set on another planet, and having the Doctor become exiled on Earth was a brainwave idea and makes for far more inventive stories. The threats seem far more genuine as they aren't on some far-off distant planet. Having a recurring supporting cast, most of which weren't officially companions, changes the on-screen dynamic of the show. It's argued that 1970 was when Doctor Who started to become more than just a TV show. For a show that was in its 7th season, it's interesting how at this stage at least, Doctor Who hadn't yet creatively stalled. Season 8 also included some big changes, though not quite as many or as large changes as Season 7. Due to falling pregnant, Caroline John did not return as Liz Shaw, and as a result, Liz Shaw was never written out properly, unlike most companions. However, differing accounts suggest that Caroline John's contract was not renewed because new producer Barry Letts did not like the character. Whatever the case, there was now a vacancy in the companion role. That vacancy was soon filled by Jo Grant, as played by Katie Manning. Jo Grant was written as more of a traditional companion and depicted as far less resourceful than Liz Shaw. However, Jo Grant does go through a character arc of sorts throughout seasons 8 to 11, though not the sort of character arc people would expect from a 21st century companion. Prior to Season 8, there had been recurring adversaries such as the Cybermen and the Daleks, though none had so far appeared with Pertwee. Season 8 was the first season where a recurring adversary would appear in every story. The adversary for Season 8 was not the Cybermen and the Daleks, but a new villain known as the Master. The Master was written to be the Moriarty to the Doctor's Holmes, The Master was played by Roger Delgado, who brought something amazing to the show. His performance speaks for itself. The on-screen dynamic between Pertwee and Delgado is fantastic and works brilliantly. The Master was a great idea and really freshened up the show and allowed the writers to make the Doctor's exile on Earth more interesting. By season 9, it was decided that after a 5-year absence that the Daleks would return. They returned in the opening story, Day of the Daleks. Due to budget constraints, a common issue in Classic Who, very few Daleks actually appear on screen. The Daleks don't spend too much time on screen, and while it may sound like a generalisation, this story isn't too fondly remembered. It isn't especially loathed, but it's not thought of as an especially epic return. Once the Daleks returned in this story, they were going to appear in at least one story in every season for the remainder of the Pertwee era. Over the course of the Third Doctor era, the Doctor's exile is gradually reduced. In fact, season 7 was the only Third Doctor season to have every story set on Earth. To begin with, the Doctor was sent on missions by the Time Lords. One such example was the season 9 story, The Mutants, which was set in the 30th century. To celebrate 10 years of Doctor Who, the opener to the 10th season was called The Three Doctors. As the title suggests, there were 3 Doctors on screen. Patrick Troughton returned as the second Doctor, and William Hartnell, due to failing health, only to several cameos scattered throughout the story. It was the first time in the history of the show that multiple Doctors appeared on screen. At the end of the 3 Doctors, as a thanks for saving the day, the Doctor's exile is lifted and he becomes free to travel the universe. However, the multi-Doctor story wasn't the only way the show marked 10 years on air. The third story, Frontier in Space, included another appearance from the Master. Frontier in Space also features the reappearance of the Ogrons, who had last appeared in Day of the Daleks. The 6-parter, as the name implies, takes place across space, in a tense adventure depicting 2 sides on the brink of war. The true puppet master of the scenario is revealed to be the Daleks, who appear near the end of the story. Frontier in Space ended up being Roger Delgado's final Doctor Who story, as he was killed in Turkey in a car crash in June 1973. As a result of his sudden death, the Master was retired from the show, with limited references made to the character. The Master would not appear again until 1976, by which stage he was played by Peter Pratt and written in a totally different style. The following story, Planet of the Daleks, follows on directly from where Frontier in Space left off. The Daleks that appear in this story are from the same time as the Daleks that appeared in Frontier in Space. Despite being linked together via story beats and the cliffhanger, Planet of the Daleks is actually quite a different story to Frontier in Space. However, many people consider the 2 stories to be part of the same wider narrative, and therefore a long 12-part epic. Planet of the Daleks was written by Terry Nation, who famously created the Daleks all the way back in 1963. Planet of the Daleks is, however, a near-carbon copy of the original Dalek story, barring a few details. Nation hadn't written for Doctor Who since 1965, so this story did make for a disappointing return. The Dalek stories during the Pertwee era are generally quite underwhelming. The initial 5-year absence didn't result in them becoming more interesting once they returned. In the final story of season 10, Joe Grant was written out of the series in one of the more emotional companion swan songs of Classic Who. The Green Death is one of the most often remembered Doctor Who stories, least of all by the generation who grew up watching it. Season 11 was Jon Pertwee's final season as the Doctor. It saw a number of changes. After 4 seasons of the colourful title sequence, the title sequence was given an update. One of the biggest changes of season 11 was the new companion Sarah Jane Smith, as played by Elizabeth Sladen. Sarah Jane Smith is one of the most popular companions the show has ever had, and for good reason. Of all Doctor Who characters, excluding the differing incarnations of the Doctor, Sarah Jane Smith is probably one of, if not the most popular character. Season 11 saw the introduction of the Sontarans in The Time Warrior, an adversary that would recur throughout the show's history. Pertwee's final story, Planet of the Spiders, is a rather bittersweet adventure. It has some classic moments and some great lines of dialogue, but Planet of the Spiders feels like a surprisingly emotional story, which isn't something you may expect from this era of Who. Being a regeneration story, and indeed the end of an era, it was always going to feel a bit emotional, particularly for those who grew up watching Pertwee at the time. However, there is something different about this story that is quite hard to define. Planet of the Spiders is genuinely fantastic and makes for a brilliant conclusion to the 5-season-long Pertwee era. Any season on Metabelius 3 is fantastic, and the Great One makes for a truly menacing adversary to the Third Doctor. The story includes many themes and unsubtle references to meditation and Buddhism. It was an interesting creative decision that paid off thematically, as Planet of the Spiders ties up the Third Doctor era very nicely indeed. The first 3 seasons of the Pertwee era are fantastic, particularly season 7. However, once the exile is lifted, the Pertwee era loses that uniqueness and slides into what you could call generic Who. Post-exile Pertwee isn't bad, it's still great, but those first 3 seasons were something very special. Over the past near 50 years, since the Third Doctor was first introduced on television, there has been a multitude of Third Doctor spin-off material. In 1989, Jon Pertwee reprised his role as the Third Doctor to appear in the Doctor Who stage production Doctor Who: The Ultimate Adventure. Due to health concerns, Pertwee pulled out of the play and was soon replaced by Sixth Doctor actor Colin Baker. In the summer of 1993, a BBC radio drama starring Jon Pertwee and Nicholas Corney was released. The Paradise of Death consisted of 5 half-hour episodes, so it was very much an audio version of Classic Who. The last radio drama that Pertwee recorded was The Ghosts of N-Space. It too starred Nicholas Courtney along with Elizabeth Sladen. It was broadcast in January and February 1996. In May 1996, Jon Pertwee passed away. In 2003, Zagreus was released. It's one of the most bizarre Doctor Who stories in all of Doctor Who media. Zagreus was written to celebrate 40 years of Doctor Who and includes appearances from multiple Doctors and companions. Jon Pertwee's voice is used with permission. His vocals have been used for a fan production called Devious. The vocals were edited seamlessly into the final product that became Zagreus. As for non-Pertwee Third Doctor appearances, I should have mentioned the Third Doctor Adventures from Big Finish. The Third Doctor Adventures have released 5 volumes since 2015. In the role of the Third Doctor is Tim Treloar, who does a fantastic job at capturing Pertwee. But it's not an impression or an imitation, which I think is absolutely right. From the clips I've heard of Tim Treloar as the Third Doctor, I can picture the Third Doctor rather than some other character, so that to me means he's doing a pretty good job. The addition of the unit family makes this era of Who all the more unique. The Brigadier would continue to appear alongside other Doctors, but far less frequently. Sergeant Benton didn't appear at all beyond Season 13's The Android Invasion, and Captain Mike Yates was written out in Planet of the Spiders. That's one thing about the Pertwee era. While the Third Doctor is very much the main character and there is still a companion, this era at times feels very ensemble-esque. It's a nice change in the format beyond the intricacies of the specific story. The Third Doctor era didn't outstay its welcome. 5 seasons and that's it. No other era has been quite like this one in terms of the style and in some cases the quality. A lot of people compare the Third Doctor with James Bond, and such similarities are easy to spot. This era feels very much steeped in the 70s, while also remaining timeless, if that makes any kind of sense. Jon Pertwee stands out amongst the long list of Doctors. There's a sharpness to his performance and also a uniqueness. The Third Doctor era is remembered as one of the most consistent eras of Doctor Who, but also an era that brought about a huge amount of changes to the show, arguably the biggest changes since the show's inception in 1963.